what servant leaders do, there are 5 practices. They are outlined with the acronym SERVE, S-E-R-V-E. Servant leaders, number 1, yes, they see the future. A clear and compelling vision is foundational to setting direction with goals and strategies. 2, they engage and develop people. Finding and equipping effective individuals and teams is essential to high performance implementation. There's a key issue here for leadership. Leadership is about equipping and empowering people to do ministry. And the fundamental question we have to ask ourselves, and this becomes especially true in larger congregations, for key leaders, and particularly if you're going to be in a staff role, whether that's a lay person in a staff role, and more large churches are employing lay people in key roles, or whether you're clergy in a staff role, would you rather do the ministry, or would you rather equip other people to do the ministry? And those are 2 different worlds. And a lot of people would rather just do the ministry. Good example, Christian education or religious education. Would I rather be teaching the class, or would I rather be training and equipping teachers to teach the class? And that's the difference. And at a leadership level, we have to be thinking in that engaging and developing people to do the ministry. Reinvent continuously is the R. Constant learning followed by relevant action leads to continuous improvement. And then the V is value, results, and relationships. I remember Lyle Schaller was one of the great authors on church development in the United States over much of the 20th century, particularly the last half of the 20th century. Once said that in these large mega churches, more emphasis, the value is placed on results over relationships, and I've seen churches like that. Amen. Sorry to go down that little trail. I've seen churches like that, but to me that's a forced dichotomy that's not necessary. You can value results and relationships, and I like the way Blanchard does that. Maximize effectiveness as a leader with high expectations for both results and relationships. And then finally, embody the values. Build trust by consistently living and frequently communicating core values. You do not have core values in a church just because you say you have core values in a church. And you don't have core values because you had a good process and you agreed on 12 core values, which are way too many to be core. Ken Blanchard says if you have more than 3, they're not core. And he says you should number them in order of importance because the first one is what always guides you. That's the ultimate test of whether you should be doing something or not. But core values become core when they're really lived and embraced and lived and breathed by the people of the congregation. Let's go to the next slide on motivation. He talks about motivation of leaders. And I like this distinction. Blanchard makes the distinction between leaders who are driven versus those who are called. Now here we come to that notion of calling again. This is a matter of motivation. It is the difference between self-serving leaders and servant leaders. Driven people think they own everything. Their relationships, their possessions, their positions. Most of their time is spent protecting what they own. Called people believe everything is on loan. Called people who are servant leaders understand that their position is on loan from all the stakeholders, including the people who report to them. It's like the volunteers. Do I own the volunteers or do the volunteers own me? That's a key distinction. And I see that among staff members in churches where that's a different, mindsets, and there are important distinctions to be made. Servant leaders thrive on listening to, developing, and partnering with others. And so that's a key distinction in motivations. Then there was another distinction that Blanchard made, which I love. He said there are two ways in which the human ego can keep persons from becoming servant leaders. One is too much and one is too little. Ego edema, which is swollen ego, false pride, and an inflated sense of self. And the other is ego anemia, which is fear, self-doubt, and low self-esteem. Either one can prevent effective servant leadership. And I think many of us have, if you just think to leaders that you have been involved with, you probably could have seen situations somewhere in your history where one or the other, a leader that lacked such self-esteem that they just were not effective as a leader, or a leader that was had such an inflated sense of self that they weren't effective either, in a different direction. One would evoke apathy, and the other would evoke, evoke anger, to have to deal with someone like that. I love the work of Margaret Wheatley, and if you've not read her, she was real popular in the 90s with some of her work. She wrote a wonderful book called Leadership in the New Science, and she says that there are many patterns and many beliefs out there about leadership, about people, about motivation, about human development. The essential truth I'm discovering right now is that when we are together, more becomes possible. The belief that you are called to be a servant leader, I believe, is the belief of who we are as a species. We have a need for each other. We have a desire for each other. And more, I believe that if the real work is to stay together, then we are not only the best resource to move into this future, we are the only resource. We need to learn how to be together. That is the essential work of the servant leader. So it's highly relational. And with that, I would like to just walk through this with you a little bit, this other handout. And because I just found this week, it's not on the slides, but I will be incorporating it into the prelude materials in the future. But I'm so glad to find some academics that have gone through the work of producing a scale and a construct, and I understand they also have an instrument, but they do have some questions that we're going to use in our small groups. But let's just look through, just from what I've said so far, if you could, and just take a pen and write down, if you could think of one word that comes to your mind when you think of servant leader, what would that word be? One word that comes to your mind when you think of this concept of servant leader, what would it be? Off the top of your head, just write it down.
Grounded.
Grounded is the other word for doormat.
Available.
Write them down. Everybody write them down, and then we're going to have you share. One word when you think of servant leader. Okay, someone share. What's your word?
Listener.
What?
Listener.
Listening?
A listener.
What?
A listener.
Listener. Great. Okay.
Open.
Open.
Humble.
Humble.
Available.
Available.
Authentic.
Authentic. Great. Anyone else?
Giving.
Giving. Good.
Serving.
Serving. There was another one? I didn't hear that last one.
There's two servings.
Serving?
Serving,
Was there one after that? Okay.
I think.
I was just repeating her. I
Standard
was like confirming her.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, in their work, these two professors, John Barbudo and Daniel Wheeler, identified 11 characteristics that identify a servant leader. And of these 11 characteristics, some are inherent attributes or beliefs that servant leaders need to hold. Many of these characteristics are behavioral in nature and describe what servant leaders do. However, some of these characteristics are developed skills, and they specify as they go through the 11. So let's take a look at the 11 real quickly here. The first one is calling. Servant leaders have a natural desire to serve others. They have a desire to make a difference for other people and will pursue opportunities to impact others' lives, never for their own gain. Unless a person has a natural calling to serve, servant leadership is not a realistic or compatible style. Second is listening. Servant leaders are excellent listeners. They are receptive and genuinely interested in the views and the input of others. Listening is a skill that can be learned and is essential for those who desire to